So, this is another in the series of our speaker series that we have, usually once a quarter. We had one, I don't know, Fletcher, last month maybe?
Yeah, the 25th of August.
25th of August, when we had a speaker speak of Oscar Martin, the architect. I don't see any people from that show that we did here tonight. You were? Okay, oh good, couple. Okay, well you came back, so you must have enjoyed it. It's, like I said, very nice to see people here. Did you know that Forest Park closed over 50 years ago, and here you are going to listen to this? So I am guessing that there's a lot of people here that have some connection to Forest Park, and that's great. And so we have a great speaker lined up here. John Malick has been doing this show for some 30 years, right? My cheaters. So John was the founder and chairman of an organization called Friends of Forest Park, and he has been in that capacity since 1983. That's like 33 years. That's a long time. He has accumulated a whole lot of pictures and memorabilia from Forest Park. We have a number of things displayed on the table, which certainly you're welcome to come up and take a look at when we're finished here. With that, let me turn the mic over to John Malick, who will take us through Forest Park.
Thank you, everyone. Especially want to thank the Williamstown Historical Society and Stu and Fletcher for getting a hold of me to give you a presentation on Forest Park tonight. My name is John Malick, and as Stu had mentioned earlier, I founded the Friends of Forest Park back in the early 80s. And I'm here tonight to give you a brief history of the park. There's a little display table over there. You might see yourself in some of these pictures. It happens, trust me. But I usually begin our presentation just telling about the organization and why it was founded. Basically to preserve a piece of the history in Bucks County known as Forest Park, and that goes back before the Civil War. And we always thought something should have been done to preserve part of the property, which really has been done. A lot of the trees have been preserved, kind of in commemoration of the history of the park. So for that record, the group has been pretty successful. We're not very active anymore because there's really not much else we can do, but we do come out and do these presentations to schools and civic groups, anyone who's interested in learning a little bit more about the local history of Forest Park. So I'll begin by giving you a brief history, and then we can go into the slideshow. And then if you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask. And then when we're finished, go ahead and check out the display table, and I hope you enjoy it. When I talk about Forest Park, I like to begin with the history of the area because the property itself at one time in the 1700s was owned by Simon Butler, who was a Welsh farmer and owned huge amounts of property in the area. That's why we call Route 202 Butler Avenue and Butler Pike. Okay, it goes all the way down to Ambler. It's the same Simon Butler. And I'm told that it even goes down as far as Baltimore, which he owned property down there. There's a Butler Avenue somewhere down there off of Route 40, I believe. Simon Butler didn't have much to do with the park other than he was the original owner of the property. But it wasn't until about 1835 when the Eckert family, a local group, purchased the property as a farm. It was George Eckert who purchased the property, and when he passed, he left it to his son Charles, who decided to have a small picnic grove known as Eckert's Grove. This was before the Civil War. It was probably the simplest idea of a park that you could imagine. Some people say, well, what kind of rides did they have? Well, rides weren't available just yet. Probably the best they could offer at that time was rowboats, maybe some swimming in the Pine Run Creek, picnics, maybe a hayride or two. It wasn't until the 1880s that it began to come into view as a real first-class amusement park. At that time, the park was purchased by the Funk family, who had a lot to do with the local history in New Britain and Chalfont. And it was Isaac Funk, who was the proprietor of the property, who first introduced the carousel into the park. This was a steam-operated carousel, a Denzel carousel from Germany. And he also had a hay ride, and it was he who started advertising locally, and also, as you'll find on the table, had photos of the park taken for postcards, which was really popular, all the way up to the turn of the century and quite a while after that even. The Funk family owned the park all the way to about, I believe, 1921, because Isaac had passed, I believe, in 1911. They also had a toboggan slide, which was an early forerunner of what we call roller coasters today. We have a photo tour of that on the table. The Funk family would have picnics into the thousands, all the way up into the 1920s. But they finally decided to sell the property in the late 20s, and there were Doylestown by the name of Coons and Sanders that bought the property. It's documented that they really had good intentions, but they weren't amusement park business people, and they didn't really know how to run the park. They also sold the park a few years later to a German baker who just had immigrated from Germany to Philadelphia, who took his hand at it, but that didn't work out too well either. It wasn't until the early 1930s when the Lussy family from Germantown, Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, had an idea of installing a bumper car ride into the park, that the park's popularity really began to take off. They had, the family had manufactured the bumper cars going back to 1918 in their factory in Germantown, and it was Mrs. Lussy who decided to install the ride at Forest Park. And she came home and told her husband that it was a great place. They were still feeling the effects of the Depression, and they were barely breaking even each year. Mr. Lussy was more into the amusement business on a worldwide level, installing the rides in Europe and everywhere, and he had a lot of connections in the park industry. So what he did was he had a friend at Pittsburgh's famous Kennywood Park, which is still open, by the way, who had a radio personality by the name of Uncle Ezra, appearing like several times during each park season. Well, he asked Brady McSwiggin, the owner, if Uncle Ezra could make a stop over at Forest Park just to bring in a few more picnickers. And, well, it turned out Uncle Ezra was booked up for 2 years because he was popular. And some of you might remember Uncle Ezra. But as luck would have it, he did get a cancellation on Labor Day of 1933. And he said, well, yeah, I'll come out to Forest Park and we'll see what happens. Well, it turned out that they had 10,000 people come into that park that day. And in one day, the park went into the black. The Lussy family, seeing dollar signs, decided to install more kiddie rides to increase the picnic business. And they did that for several years, right up into World War II, when they would have as many as 30 or 40,000 people visit the park on any special company picnic day or holiday. I guess the most famous one was the Bud Company, which would come up to the park and bring all of their employees, especially during World War II, which totaled to be about 40,000 people. And they really basically took over the park for the whole day. In fact, the first slide is the Bud Company picnic. In the late 40s, the Lussys decided to install what they called Frontier Town, Now, Frontier Town was a piece of the park that was based on the Wild West, which was popular. But the Wild West had its own little connection into the park, which was the theme of the park. And the theme of the park was based on the legend of Chief Tammany, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And the theme of the park became the story of the chief's death. And that was, I'm told by several folks, that there's a story or a legend that the chief was actually buried in the area known as Forest Park way back in the late 1600s. Now, some folks have asked, well, can we have an archaeological dig back there? Can we look for the chief? Well, the Indians didn't typically bury people the way we do today. Their graves were a lot more shallow, and they liked to bury them next to the creek, and I'm just about 100% positive whatever remains of Chief Tammany were probably long gone. But the story is that the chief was taking his tribe down the Pine Run and Neshaminy Creek to meet with William Penn's son for trading. And the story goes on that he became sick, and he urged his tribe to go on without him, which they did, and they left an Indian squaw behind to take care of the chief. He became sicker one night, and she built a fire. She ran out of wood and went off to get some more wood. And when she came back, the chief's body had rolled over onto the fire. No one knows if it was an accident or if he decided to do himself in on purpose. I certainly don't know. So we had a frantic squaw the next morning, running around looking for someone to tell her what to do with the chief's body, and she ran into the Schul family, who were also among the original New Britain Township, and they told her to bury the body near the creek. I'm not exactly sure where, but supposedly it was buried near an Indian marker tree. Now, an Indian marker tree is where they took a sapling coming up, such as an oak, and they would take the first branch, plant it back into the ground, and point it to the direction southbound on the creek. And supposedly there's still a few of these trees left in Bucks County. I think Forest Park has one of them. But I haven't been back there in a little while to confirm that. But so that became the legend of the park, based on Chief Tammany. And of course, in the 40s and 50s, the Wild West shows were a big deal as television was coming in and everything. So that was what Frontier Town was all about. And Forest Park even had a live Cherokee Indian, Chief One Star, who would work at the park during the day, and he would stage mock holdups on the train, which the kids loved. And he would also take them around the park, teaching them about animal footprints and the leaves and the trees, and telling them about Indian stories. And he was popular at Frontier Town. And that went on, and the Lussys increased, added some more rides as the picnic goers increased. But a lot of folks say, well, what happened? Why did the park go downhill? What happened in the 1950s? Why don't we have it today? Okay, well, the first problem they ran across was in 1955, and I'm sure some of you remember, there were two hurricanes that came up within a week of each other, and it was called the famous 55 flood, which did a lot of damage, and Forest Park, being surrounded by two creeks, was completely flooded out. So they pretty much had to close from mid-August to just about Labor Day until the waters receded, and it did a lot of damage back there. There was also an amusement tax imposed on the park, which basically, I believe it was a Central Bucks School District that wanted picnics of 1,000 or more had to pay a amusement tax, which kind of started creating problems for people that were interested in having picnics back there, because they didn't want to pay the extra fee to a school district that they more than likely didn't have anything to do with, because they were coming from Philly and Camden and Chester and Allentown. Perhaps the biggest problem was opening day, Memorial Day 1958, there was a race ride back at the park. I've actually spoken to a few people that were there that day, and they said it was the worst thing they've ever seen in their life. There were 20 people hurt. State police came in from 11 different barracks, and the Pennsylvania National Guard was on standby. This was a bad day at the park. The Reading train was damaged, and the park was closed for about a week. Mr. Lussy and his managers never had issues back there prior, and I think he felt so embarrassed that he decided to sell the park in 1959. He sold it to the Kane family. Now, the Kane family is very successful today. They own and run Riverside Park up in Massachusetts, and they've done very well with it. But in the early 60s, when they were just learning the business, they were just trying to get familiar with it, and they made a lot of mistakes. They invested almost $500,000, which in the 1960s was quite a bit of money. But they just didn't understand the marketing or the amusement business like the Lussy family did. They did manage to keep the park open for a few more years, but ultimately the park closed in 1966. And since then it's been kind of dormant, and part of the property is owned by the North Penn and North Wales Water Authority, today known as Forest Park Water. And that's pretty much the history of the park in a nutshell. There's a lot of details I could go on and on here about, but that's where the park, that's pretty much the main history of the park. And well, without any further ado, I'll do a little slideshow here for you, and then if you have any questions or if you see yourself in any of these slides, feel free to chime in. You know, it's like I said, it's possible. The Reading Railroad did have a station back at the park, and the park became so popular at one point they almost got their own zip code because of the mail. They were getting way too much for the Chalfont post office. But this is the Bud train, and I'm told that the Bud trains had 20 trains, and each train had about 18 cars to bring the employees up from Philadelphia. This is another shot of the Bud picnic coming into the park.
What year was that?
This is 1951. This is a typical day at the park with a Bud picnic.
Where is that area? Like, if we were looking there.
This here is the bathhouses to the pool to the left. So just beyond that train would have been like what is now the Scanlon Funeral Home on Route 202. Tickets coming into the Bud picnic.
When was the pool put in?
The pool was put in 1927, and yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I kind of skipped over that. The pool was an Olympic-sized pool built by Doylestown contractors Beatty and Son. It was quite a novelty at the time because it was 75 by 150 feet and had several bathhouses, had a fountain in the middle, diving boards, sliding boards. It was quite a novelty in the late 1920s especially because there weren't many pools around. And Forest Park had a great pool.
Is the bridge still there?
Parts of the bridge are still there. We've actually had a couple of contractors look at it just to see if it's possible that it could even be repaired, which wouldn't be cheap at all. It can be done, but unfortunately, it's not getting in any better condition.
Is that Pine Run? Is that Pine Run?
Yeah, that's a Pine Run Creek. Yeah.
Is that the miniature railroad, or could you ride on the miniature railroad?
Yeah, you could ride the miniature railroad, but it didn't go over the bridge.
But in front of the bridge, it's like
Oh no, that was just a path. Yeah. This is the famous swan boat ride built by the Lussy family. They also had these locally at Willow Grove Park.
Are they on a pond or on a creek?
It's the Pine Run Creek, and it was dammed up. So in that particular area, a lot of people thought it was a pond or a lake, especially folks coming up from Philadelphia, because it sure looked that way. But like today, I mean, they took the dam out, and it's fairly narrow.
What moves the swans?
The swan, there was a cable mechanism, and in the middle of the creek, it just ran on a circular motor, and it was, for the most part, it was buried, so you didn't see it, but it went around in a big circle.
I think they're still in Boston, aren't they, the original?
I'm told there's a couple up there, yeah. This is the famous whip ride. They,
No, I was there in the 30s,
oh, okay.
and I remember swimming in the pool, and I remember those.
It was a wild ride. I know.
I probably got sick.
Too many French fries, right? Knoble's Park still has the original Mangles whip ride in it. And I mean, it's from the 40s and it's still operational, which is amazing. There's another close-up. This ride was heavily damaged by the 1955 flood. Yeah, rowboats were really popular. And during the 1955 flood, by the way, the rowboats were scattered all over the park. And it just so happened that a Reading passenger train was stranded on the trestle, which is right there where the confluence of the Neshaminy and Pine Run Creeks are.
Forest Park had its own little nursery area. People sometimes ask me, how did they get 30,000 people back there? When I take tours, I show people the remains of the picnic tables, and there's just rows and rows and rows of them. And several picnic areas, like maybe 20 different areas, and you can see why hundreds of people could fit into one little picnic area.
How many acres was the park?
The park was 120 acres. It was basically the same size and area as Willow Grove. Pony rides. A lot of kiddie rides at Forest Park. This is a little rocket airship ride. This, I believe, was a fire engine ride. The kiddie Ferris wheel in the background. Another close-up. I'm told that Ferris wheel went to West Point Park a few years after it closed. In right by North Shortman Dome. And the owner of West Point, incidentally, started out as a concessionaire at Forest Park in the 50s. This is the famous band shell park. At different times, as I said earlier, the Lussy family kind of had a lot of connections in the entertainment business, and they had several appearances by Hollywood people like Marlene Dietrich, Jimmy Durante, the Three Stooges, different folks like that.
They used to bring the string bands up.
Oh yeah. I have a little jingle for you at the end here for the Mummers. Mummers were very popular at the park. In fact, at the end of the season, a lot of string bands, marching bands would come up and they would compete like they do on New Year's Day every year. And they would all do their strutting and playing their different instruments. And of course, they would be having a picnic at the park too. And they were very popular.
Oh.
Nobody seen anybody? Yeah, that didn't know?
No. Oh, yeah, first bud.
They did have a Miss Forest Park swimsuit competition. And I know the one woman that won in 1941. She's still living in North Wales, and she showed me her trophy. And I know, and it's, you know, it's a nice little emblem and everything. And I actually met the person who came in second. I don't know if there's any jealousy there. But they used to do that every year too. Somebody's going to enter root beer. This is part of the carousel, and they did have not only the horses, but they had a pig, they had a giraffe, they had the Roman chariots. I think they had a rooster too. And any number of games. They also had a bowling alley, a baseball field. One of the things that, I don't know if I have a photo here in the slides, but there's, on the table, when we're finished, there's what we call the Forest Park illuminations. And one of the ideas that the Lussys had, being that they went all over the world, they visited Blackpool, England. And if you know anything about Blackpool, it's near Liverpool, they're well known for what they call their illuminations. And they do this, it's a big tourist thing, even to this day, where they have fairy tale figures, cartoon figures, even, you know, modern day figures that light up and move electrically, and it lights up the whole Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Well, when the Lussys visited there, they got the idea to bring some of this back to the park. And I have some photos on the table that you can look at. But they had Humpty Dumpty, Jack Be Nimble, Jack Be Quick, the Puff the Magic Dragon, several, they had about 35 of them throughout the park, and they come to life at night. These are the 1940s bumper cars. Always a popular thing. I know Knoebels up in Ealersburg still has bumper cars from the 1940s that amazingly are fully operational. They had a penny arcade at the park, which was often found to have counterfeit slugs in there. A lot easier to do back then. This little guy here is watching Gene Tunney, Jack Dempsey, 7th-round fight. This is a bowling alley in the park. I've actually talked to a few people that were pin boys, pin girls too. And they got paid, but they got extra. They got a plate of ice cream, which the regular employees didn't get, because by the end of each day they had bruised knuckles. The Chalfont Auditorium was also held at Forest Park. And this later, I'm told, and I'm pretty sure it's true, was used for the first 2 years of St. Jude's Catholic Church in Chalfont. Until their church got built, they held their Sunday services at the auditorium at the park.
That is true. That is true.
This is the Ferris wheel.
Did you go up in that?
I'm told they had to call the fire company in a couple times. I got stuck. This is the Forest Park Railway that went through the park, and this is one of the things I remember riding when I was a kid. And I guess my interest in trains was great anyway, because my father worked for the railroad, and we loved going over the creek and back into Frontier Town and all throughout the park. That was the Forest Park Crusader, I believe. There's a salt and pepper shaker, which I think you mentioned you got sick on the whip ride. Well, this was the one, it was even worse. I know I had a hard time on that one. Another close-up. The octopus ride is in the back. Couple of close-ups of Bud employees. Nobody knows anybody here?
Probably in their 90s.
This was basically a typical day back at the park, although with the Bud Company, there was a lot of people. I mean, you could go there on a weekday and it wouldn't be nearly as crowded, you know, but when they came up, it was, they brought all their auxiliary plants and all the employees came up and it was full. And that's one of the old Forest Park postcards. And if you want to see more, I have more back there at the table. And that's pretty much it for the slides. I want to close out with a little Mummers jingle here. And this is actually a live recording from the 50s of the Mummers String Band at the park. And they do a little plug for the park, which they were required to do. They didn't mind doing it because they were having a good time anyway. So this is the Uptown String Band.
Now, beautiful Forest Park is located along Highway Route 202 in Chalfont, among the rolling hills of Bucks County in Pennsylvania. Well, folks, the corn is really ripening fast, and what would be more enjoyable than having a corn roast when you picnic at Forest Park?